And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program on this Monday, March 23rd. Great to be with you today in what promises to be a great and jam-packed edition of the show. Full 4 segments this time. Very excited, revved up, and ready to go. Thanks for joining us as we are ready to make sense out of nonsense, as we do day in and day out here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style. So today, in just a matter of moments, we will play my interview from Saturday, which we broadcasted live on Facebook Live, with U.S. Senator Cory Gardner, who is in self-quarantine as directed to him by health officials. Please note that this is before we learned yesterday that U.S. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky was actually diagnosed with this virus, tested positive with it. Senator Gardner is in quarantine under the abundance of caution for a couple of weeks. He is a Republican senator from Colorado. We will also talk with a doctor, with Dr. Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman for New York State, and get her perspective on some of the medical side of this, possibilities for treatment, so forth, as well as her thoughts on shutdowns that are happening in states like New York, where she lives, California, now Michigan added to the list, but not Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from. Colorado, a very different story at this point, with Governor Jared Polis saying something different in terms of his approach to all of this. We'll talk about that. Plus, our producer extraordinaire, Matoush Magic, will join us live for the very first time later today, as well as Rick Newman, who is a columnist at Yahoo Finance. And I'm looking forward to chatting with Rick. He always gives some great insights on the economy and so forth. But without further ado, let's go to our interview, again from Saturday, with U.S. Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado.
Just doing a special interview today with U.S. Senator Cory Gardner from Colorado. Senator Gardner, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. It is such a pleasure to have you here. And I have to say, appreciate you joining us, especially from Corian quarantine right now.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, so Senator, tell us why you're in quarantine right now over in Washington, D.C.
You know, I had been meeting with constituents last week when I was informed by the Tri-County Health Department, which covers Adams, Arapahoe, Douglas counties, that I had met with a constituent that tested positive for COVID-19. And so I was on the 11th of March, and so I was told by them that I needed to be quarantined for 14 days from the 11th of March. So here I am in my 300 square foot studio apartment that, as you can tell, it doesn't even really have anything on the wall.
Well, you need to get something there on the wall, Senator Cory Gardner, but that's okay. All right, so let's talk about the environment right now in Washington, D.C. There is a lot of concern from Americans across the country about what's happening in the land all around, what Americans are dealing with, but also a lot of curiosity about members of Congress like yourself. You're a United States Senator, one of several now in quarantine, and you can't vote when you are not on the floor. What can you do moving forward if Congress needs to address situations and this expands among members, or at least the concern, and you have to self-quarantine?
You know, it's a great question. The irony, Jimmy, is that I was asking on the day that I ended up in quarantine, I asked my staff to give me a primer, basically, on what happens in the Senate. What can we vote on with a simple majority vote? What can we vote on with 60 votes? What can we vote on with a majority of those members present? If there's only 60 members in the Senate, what can we do with the simple majority of 60 members, 31? And later that afternoon, of course, I get the notice that I have to go into a self-isolation. And so here we are. But there's a bill that's been introduced to try to allow for remote voting. And it's something that I think Congress is going to have to consider with proper safeguards to allow this to happen should we have a similar or ongoing situation.
Again, we're talking with U.S. Senator Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado. Let's talk about the economic policies in Washington, D.C. There's debate, discussion going on right now about a $1 trillion stimulus package, including sort of a universal basic income for Americans across the country. I'm curious, Senator Gardner, on that and other issues relative to the economic fallout. What do you think Congress should be doing right now? Do you agree with the approach being taken this weekend?
Yeah, so basically what happened when COVID-19 hit the United States, hit the world, quite frankly, it inserted a circuit breaker into our commerce. And that circuit breaker has been tripped by this pandemic, and it's kind of ground everything to a halt. And we have an obligation or responsibility to make sure that our economy, people who are suffering right now because they're out of work, they don't know what's going to happen to their jobs, are able to snap back once this health emergency is over. And so we've been focused on three things. Number one, address the health emergency. Number two, address individuals and how we make sure that they are going to be okay. And number three, what we're doing for businesses around the country, particularly small businesses, to make sure they can continue to keep people on board, continue to pay, and then get back open once this emergency is over. And that's what we're dealing with right now. As you mentioned, a number of different debates that are still being negotiated, a number of technical details still being negotiated. But I'm participating in every single one of those, fighting for Colorado.
Senator Cory Gardner, I agree wholeheartedly with the idea that if the governments across the country are going to be shutting down businesses, that the federal government should step in with some sort of relief, particularly with expanding unemployment insurance to furloughed workers and so forth. But where I get more concerned is the idea of sending out checks to Americans who may not be out of work right now, just something broad-based, especially because I look at history and I see a lot of instances where politicians will go ahead and implement policies during a crisis, and even after the crisis abates, a big, expansive government policy doesn't go away. What assurances do you think we can have that if there's some variation of a UBI, universal basic income, that it doesn't stay permanent or come back in the future when somebody says, well, we have a precedent from coronavirus in 2020, we should act similarly?
Well, and I think that's a big concern. And as I have said with the ideas that get brought up in presidential elections, a lot of times those ideas don't become the ceiling for what somebody does next. They become the floor for what somebody does next. And all of a sudden you try to build off of that. So we have to be very careful about what happens with these policies. It sounds like there may be some debate right now moving away from or toward a lesser direct assistance and more towards an unemployment insurance model. That's actually something that I had been pushing for, was let's use our existing unemployment insurance system, which is scalable and already set up and running, to provide a COVID-19 furlough with assistance. And that, I think, is more direct help, less fraud, less potential to get this wrong in an existing system. So that may be the direction that we're able to get through after the agreements are made today.
And on Thursday, I published a piece in the Washington Examiner entitled "Coronavirus is No Excuse for a Trump New Deal" that expressed exactly that view, is that there's an existing system already in place. If you provide benefits to an expanded number of Americans who are temporarily out of work from that existing system, because of coronavirus, you provide something that doesn't open up the floodgates to a brand new expanded federal program. But Senator Gardner, how about support for businesses, especially small businesses, self-employed, loans in that regard, or what have you? What do you think for the business side?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have the health emergency, you have the individual assistance, and then you have that third bucket that we have to address, and at the same time that we're addressing the other two, and that's the business assistance. And so a couple of things that are taking place right now as we negotiate the details. The idea that we create a small business stabilization fund, another proposal that I had been pushing through the American Workforce Act, that we would create a loan to small businesses, 500 people or less, that would basically be forgiven as long as it was paid as long as you use that loan to pay for salary of your workers, keep them on payroll, wages of your workers that you keep on payroll, that you pay for rent, mortgage payments between March 1st and June 30th, then that would be forgiven. It's a way to jumpstart the economy during a time when we know most of these businesses have been shuttered and shut down, especially if you're a restaurant or hotel owner. So that's what we're looking there. That's for businesses that are 500 or less. If you're a bigger business than that, there's just going to be a series of loan programs that are going to be set up and established, varying structures. So distressed industries, whether that's a hospital or whether that is a bigger hotel or bigger restaurant chain, they're going to find the ability to get help through those. Bottom line is we got to get this economy going once we get through this health emergency.
Final question, Senator Cory Gardner. When it comes to the trajectory here of the economy, of the economic policies, of what Congress may do, and the virus itself, what do you think the American people should know most during this time where a lot of folks are looking around saying, this is kind of crazy, and I feel like I'm living in a twilight zone?
Yeah. I think a couple things. Number one, it's most important that we've never faced this kind of challenge in our lifetimes, but we know we'll get through this together. We're a great country. Perseverance builds character, character builds hope, and that's something that we have to keep in mind throughout all of this. If they need help, call our office. Go to gardner.senate.gov, email us, give us a ring, and let us know what you need, and we'll try to do our best to provide that level of assistance that we expect in Colorado.
Senator Cory Gardner, I just have one other thing I do want to ask. Were you able to hear that show intro?
I was. It was great. Talk about great bumper music. Holy cow.
What'd you think of my harmonica playing? Was it okay?
Those are some chops. Those are some real chops. That's pretty incredible.
With the great Biff Gore on the vocals, we wrote the song together. Well, Biff did most of the writing. I just contributed a little bit. And then the harp.
Well, so that's that.
All right. Well, Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, always great to check in with you, and I really appreciate you spending time with us today. Thank you. Best of luck, by the way.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, once again, U.S. Senator Cory Gardner joining us here on the show. Always great to check in with the senator from Colorado. All
right, back live here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. That interview was from Saturday. We should have noted that in the video. I apologize, but that interview with U.S. Senator Cory Gardner was from Saturday. All right, we're going to take a quick break here on the show. You do not want to miss what we have coming up in the break, but when we return, we will be joined by none other than Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman from New York, and also herself a medical doctor. Talk a little bit more about the medical side of the coronavirus crisis. And coming up later as well, our producer extraordinaire, Matoush, Nathan Matoush with his Matoush Magic, and Rick Newman of Yahoo Finance. Without further ado, we're going to take a break, and we will be right back on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Welcome back to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show, your home for engaging, intelligent talk, same style, right here on News Talk 710 KNUS.
Please welcome Special Prosecutor Ken Starr.
Well, Judge, we've been spending a lot of time. You were on the radio for a full hour this morning with me.
And you were great, Jimmy. Everybody should tune in, regardless of where you live. This is He is terrific, and I also call him the harmonica man. He is really great with the harmonica. The law required me to provide you with this, but you can do anything you want to, including ignoring it.
I was 8 during the impeachment proceedings, Judge.
What a show-off.
I don't remember. Every time I talk with you, though, and I tell you this, you're a historical figure for me because I don't remember a day of the Clinton investigation and the impeachment proceedings and anything.
They let me out of the museum, so thank
Good. That's why. Rumors of war with Iran and an outbreak of World War III are greatly exaggerated. The Arab world, Israel, all those relations are being rebuilt because of what President Donald Trump has been doing. Unfortunately, the federal government in the 1970s virtually ended bankruptcy protection for student loan borrowers. So what happens if the walking debt bites into your bank account so deeply that you become infected? There's no escape.
It's a lump of national debt following questionable economic growth. Here you go, millennials. Merry Christmas. Ho, 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 ho. It's coal.
Jimmy, your thoughts on this very quickly? Does this sap the energy away from the Democrat?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the whole nature of the impeachment proceeding at this point in time, the backdrop is significant. Just within the last month or so, you've had President Trump give the order to take out notorious terrorist Qasem Soleimani. He got through that democratically controlled House of Representatives, the USMCA trade agreement, and the economy is really robust. So I don't think this impeachment thing plays well for the Democrats.
If you want to reach millennials, you have to understand what the generation is about. That we're not all socialists. In fact, there are natural reasons to believe that millennials are more conservative than you think. Listeners have been asking for more engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. And guess what, folks? We're going to bring it to you. We are just getting started. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you. America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hi, Tom. Gee,
Hello?
You look terrible.
I feel terrible. Achy, fevery, nauseous.
Ooh, that's too bad. You know, you ought to...
Chills, stuffiness, bloating.
Yeah, you know...
Scratchy, gassy, drippy.
I know. Say, Tom, you should try Wear-a-Flu.
Wear-a-Flu?
Wear-a-Flu is the only medication that actually takes your flu symptoms and hides them at various places inside your body so that by the time your body finds them all, your flu is gone. In the meantime, you're back to work.
You were right, Ed. Wear-a-Flu lets me ignore my flu symptoms and gets me back to work. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming in and infecting the rest of the office.
Come out wherever you are with Wear-a-Flu. Take as directed.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, making sense of nonsense with engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. Proud to be broadcasting in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much for joining us, being a part of the program. In just a little bit, we will be joined by my own producer, Nathan Matoush, always doing the Matoush magic. Looking forward to having a conversation with him, and we'll talk, kind of just get his perspective on some things, including sports. He's a big sports guy. What's going on in the sports world right now? What is there to talk about when it comes to all the sports that are not on television right now? We've got that, some questions he's got for me. It'll be a fun conversation coming up in the next segment. And then after that, Rick Newman will join us. He's a columnist at Yahoo Finance who I find always has a very interesting perspective on what's going on economically, what's going on in the business world, and so forth. So I'm looking forward to having him on the program. That will be in our fourth segment today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And by the way, in the last segment, we played my interview from Saturday with U.S. Senator Cory Gardner. And Senator Gardner is in self-quarantine. He decided to do that several days ago, as he mentioned, after coming in contact with a constituent who had tested positive. Now, I believe there are 5 U.S. senators who are in quarantine, with Rand Paul being the one and only so far to test positive for coronavirus, novel coronavirus, COVID-19. And so he's now in self-quarantine, and we do have a few other senators who are in self-quarantine as precautions. For example, Mitt Romney, senator from Utah, had a number of really close contact with Senator Paul. I think they both sat next to each other, and so he decided that it was best for him to be in quarantine. The challenge with the quarantine is that in Washington, D.C., what we are seeing is a difficulty, impossibility for those people to vote. The impossibility for people to vote when it comes to this whole situation. So what I want to do is play a clip here of Dr. Fauci. This is Dr. Anthony Fauci, and this will help us kind of set the stage for our first guest today, former Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. This is cut 7, where he's talking a little bit about comparisons to Italy and what the U.S. has done.
One of the things that we did very early and very aggressively, the president, was put the travel restriction coming from China to the United States, and most recently from Europe to the United States, because Europe is really the new China. Again, I don't know why this is happening there to such an extent, but it is conceivable that once you get so many of these spreads out, they spread exponentially, and you can never keep up with this tsunami. And I think that's what, unfortunately, our colleagues and our dear friends in Italy are facing. They are very competent. It isn't that they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think they have a situation in which they have been so overwhelmed from the beginning that they can't play catch up. And in direct answer to your question, Margaret, it is maybe, and I hope and I think it'll be the case, that we will not be that way, because we have, from the beginning, been able to put a bit of a clamper. We're going to get hit. There's no doubt about it. We see it in New York. New York is terribly suffering. But the kinds of mitigation issues that are going on right now, the things that we're seeing in this country, this physical separation, at the same time as we're preventing an influx of cases coming in, I think that's going to go a long way to preventing us from becoming an Italy.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, probably right now the most trusted man in America, particularly on the coronavirus issue when it comes to the medical concerns and flattening the curve. But also, I think in general right now, when people are concerned over what's happening, they want to get accurate information, and Dr. Fauci is somebody that people on all sides of the political spectrum seem to be trusting in this situation. All right, it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome on this Monday morning to Jimmy at the Crossroads, the former Congresswoman for New York's 19th District and herself a medical doctor. Dr. Nan Hayworth joins us here on the program. Nan, can you hear me all right? Are you there?
Hey, Jimmy, I can hear you great on my Facebook stream. But it's a little delayed from the phone. So you're broken up a little bit on my phone, and I'm listening as carefully as I can, so I apologize.
Oh, no, that's the way technology is sometimes, that's for sure, so I apologize as well. If there's a delay, that's okay. So let me just ask you real quickly, tell us a little bit about your own medical background, Nan.
Well, I'm a board-certified ophthalmologist. I practiced for 16 years in the community practice, and I worked then for a couple of years with the pharma industry, so I understand FDA approvals quite well. And then, of course, I represented the 19th District of New York in Congress. So a convergence of backgrounds is kind of useful right now.
And so when it comes to the coronavirus situation, I mean, obviously everybody is talking about flattening the curve. What does that mean, and why is that so important in your mind?
Jimmy, great question. Here is the reason entirely, basically why we are putting the nation on lockdown increasingly is because we fear, correctly, the crush of ICU and ventilator demand that we can predict. You know, there are reliable statistics. Everybody's doing their best. We have the top folks in the country, Dr. Fauci, whom you just played. So we can predict that crush, and we are preparing, obviously, a pace. But that is the reason we worry about flattening the curve. That's why we're trying to flatten the curve, spread out those cases. So what does Plaquenil do for us if it works? Plaquenil, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, its close relative, and azithromycin are all well-established medications. They've been used safely among folks around the world for decades. And what appears to be the case is that they alone, in the case of the chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, or in combination, even better, with azithromycin, can mitigate the course of coronavirus infection so that people will be able to survive it. They won't need to go into the hospital. They won't need to go into the ICU. If we can convert this into a tolerable infection, then we can live with it. Then we can resume normal life because, as you know, Jimmy, economic catastrophe also costs lives, and I am not being histrionic here. Deaths of despair, mishaps that occur, people are isolated, they may not get the care and attention they need. This is real stuff. So that's why we are so concerned about disseminating that information. Prescribers can legally prescribe those medications now in the open marketplace, but it's great, as President Trump was absolutely right about that, worth trying in these urgent times. This is like the ultimate right to try, and Dr. Fauci also right that we need to gather the data widely, transparency. We do need to treat it as a real-life, real-world clinical trial, and that is also being done.
Former Congresswoman from New York, Nan Hayworth, our guest, a medical doctor herself. Let's play Cut 10 here, since you talked about that possible combination of drugs. This is Cut 10 of Dr. Fauci on Face the Nation yesterday, where he was specifically asked about maybe a disconnect, this idea that he and President Trump are not on the same page with the combination you were just talking about.
You said this week that you differed from the president in his assessment that a combination of two drugs, hydrochloroquine and azithromycin combined, could have the outcome that he described to the public they possibly could. Who is the president listening to? And do you see a concern here that those drugs could become basically oversubscribed, and there could be a shortage that could impact people who have persistent medical issues like lupus and need those?
Okay, so Margaret, there's an issue here of where we're coming from. The president has heard, as we all have heard, what I call anecdotal reports that certain drugs work. So what he was trying to do and express was the hope that if they might work, let's try and push their usage. I, on the other side, have said, I'm not disagreeing with the fact anecdotally they might work, but my job is to prove definitively from a scientific standpoint that they do work. So I was taking a purely medical scientific standpoint, and the president was trying to bring hope to the people. I think there's this issue of trying to separate the two of us. There isn't fundamentally a difference there. He's coming from it from a hope layperson standpoint.
Okay.
I'm coming from it from a scientific standpoint.
Nan Hayworth, what did you make of that?
Yes, Jimmy, you want my comment on that?
Yes, please.
Okay. I could not agree more with nor respect Dr. Fauci more on all of the science, and his qualifiers and cautions are absolutely justified. Anecdotal reports are just that, and what that means, obviously, Jimmy, is that we don't have a formal study. Ideally, a large-scale clinical trial is what we call double-blinded and randomized. Some people get the two-drug combo, and some folks don't. And we see, how do they do? And maybe the drugs help in one way and maybe hurt in another. And the more data points we get, the more precise the picture becomes. Right now, there's only a small amount of published evidence, a small study in France, although it was striking. And more stories are emerging from clinicians around the country, including Dr. William Grace, who spoke twice now, at least, with Laura Ingraham on Fox. He's in New York City. And there was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, I think yesterday, by the former governor of Kansas, also a physician, speaking very positively of the evidence that they are developing in Kansas about this two-drug combo. So there's every reason to think, and again, the president's instincts are impeccable, and he is right. There is every reason to think that this is a good thing to have in the clinician's arsenal when we have nothing else to save people's lives other than hope and pray and provide all kinds of, ventilation support and other supports. But again, we're worried about that ICU crush. And in the meantime, everybody's lives are being held up. People are losing jobs. People are losing livelihoods. We are closing small businesses. This is an economic catastrophe that we are understandably willingly trading for an even more medical and epidemiologic catastrophe. So I respect Dr. Fauci. I agree with him on science. And the key thing we need to do is pursue, as is being facilitated from the federal level, a real world clinical trial and pump up the supplies, which is being done, of these medications so that all who want to prescribe them and are willing to undertake the risk, both from the patient side and the provider side, are able to do so. We have nothing else right now. These answers will unfold in coming days, and the faster we get them, other medications, other interventions are also being tried. I should emphasize that as well. But the faster we get them, the faster we can convert COVID-19 as we develop the vaccine. That's going to take at least another year. But as we convert COVID-19 to something survivable, then we're good.
Congresswoman Nan Hayworth joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Nan, from your medical perspective, when we're trying to flatten the curve, we've got a lot of measures that are being taken. We'll get to the specific measures, for example, out of New York State in just a moment. But what do you think? I mean, it seems like what's going on here is, as you have the government taking steps to keep people at home and so forth, it's trying to buy time for a cure and vaccine to be developed. And then we can take a little bit of a load off from the concern day to day of the extremities here. What do you make of what we're seeing? Is that part of it?
Jimmy, that was kind of broken up, but are you asking basically what else we can do to try to accelerate?
No, I'm wondering if this is
timeline towards
buying time.
resuming normal life?
Is this buying time in order to get a cure developed and be able to try to get a little bit more semblance of normalcy through the policies that state governments are taking?
Well, I mean, look, yes. Right now, obviously, we are, this is a time of national crisis. This is like, this is obviously on the magnitude in certain respects, but all of a sudden, like World War II or the Great Depression. I mean, this is the time when we expect, yes, government to step in because, as you know, they expertly, government has the scale. Government has the plenary powers in an emergency at both the state and federal levels to do certain things, to make certain things, to force certain things to happen. all that said, everybody has to bear in mind that this does not, and I know you are a herald for this, and I appreciate it, this is not a time for us then to imagine that, hey, you know, if it works now, why shouldn't we have just what you were talking about, Jimmy, in the Examiner? You know, is it now time for a new deal? New deal? No, it's not. No, not at all. That would be a disaster. In ordinary times, we have to disempower government. We have to constrain government. We have to maximize the power of citizens, marketplaces, and free enterprise, so that we can actually have the robustness and reserves we need to tackle crises like these. And hooray that we've had President Trump and the GOP in charge, unfortunately not in the House anymore, to deregulate, to cut taxes, and to build up our economy so that we had some inherent strength, and also, of course, to take on China. Praise President Trump for that, so that our recovery will be that much more swift and robust.
Sure. Nan Hayworth, I want to play two clips here, contrasting two different gubernatorial approaches at this point. We'll start with cut 11. This is Governor Jared Polis of my home state of Colorado, or at least the state where I live in. And then we'll go to where you live in my original home state of New York with Governor Andrew Cuomo. We'll do cuts 11 and 12 back to back.
As you've probably read, projections show that our national response has failed to act early enough, and this virus is likely to be with us for many months. My goal is to ensure that these extreme social distancing measures, this physical distancing of up to 6 feet, will not have to be there for the many months that we have this virus. We're going to do everything that we possible to make sure that we're doing that, but your part is the biggest. It is abiding by these physical and social distancing techniques. It is your decision to only shop for groceries once a month instead of twice. It is your decision to go jogging twice a week instead of 4 times a week. It is your decision to simply get in your car and go to work and return. It's your decision not to meet with a bunch of friends or have parties or socialize or go out for this limited period of time. Because the life you save could be your grandmother's or grandfather's, your mother's or father's, your aunts or uncle's, and it could be yours. This is not an ideal response. In the short term, Colorados need to heed this advice and take this situation as gravely and as seriously as healthcare leaders are.
These provisions will be enforced. These are not helpful hints. This is not if you really want to be a great citizen. These are legal provisions. They will be enforced. There will be a civil fine and mandatory closure for any business that is not in compliance. Again, your actions can affect my health. That's where we are. So there is a social compact that we have. Government makes sure society is safe for everyone.
Governor Jared Polis of Colorado, which is not as far gone right now as we're seeing New York is. He's saying it's personal responsibility, mandating that businesses decrease the number of employees that are on site working and so forth, encouraging and in some cases enforcing social distancing, but not to the level of New York, which is basically shutting down all non-essential business operations. What do you make of that distinction there, and do you approve of Governor Cuomo's approach, Nan Hayworth?
In some ways, it's the question for our times, isn't it? I mean, look, viruses and medical facts, medical phenomenology are, of course, independent of politics. The medical fact, let's look at it that way, the epidemiologic fact is that if we can take the human-to-human spread of this virus to zero, then we will have an optimal situation. So to the extent that human beings can constrain themselves from anything that might spread this virus to another person, then we will be doing what we need. To the extent that government must coerce us to make that happen, or in more positive terms, to the extent that government in these times of exigency, in these exceedingly unusual times of war and emergency, if government facilitates that, then I understand that impulse, because it makes it that much easier for us to comply. So I sympathize with Governor Polis's exhortations. I hope they work. But I also understand why Governor Cuomo is doing what he's doing. And I don't agree with him on a whole lot of things.
Nan Hayworth.
But I'm not, I don't fail to understand why he feels this is necessary. And again, the key is to find the way to mitigate COVID-19 so that it is a survivable condition, so that we don't have a crush and we're not left with a situation as in Italy, in which loved ones, particularly those in risk categories, including seniors, are unfortunately, we're faced with very, very difficult decisions of literally prioritizing life-saving measures. That is not where we want to go.
Former Congresswoman Nan Hayworth, let's kind of go to the crossroads of both your political background, and you are a small government individual. You believe in a limited government framework in the free market, but also you have your medical background and understand this virus. The thing that I am concerned about is how long, first of all, Americans can withstand these policies of you have to stay at home, you're under lock and key in essence, you can't go about your day, your jobs and livelihood are not just at risk, but they might be going away. Business owners, you go set up shop, you put your life savings into a company, and the last 5 years you've been running that company, maybe it's a restaurant, and now you can't do it. I don't think this can last too long. And so the question is, how do you balance individual liberty and economic livelihoods, which are so important to actually living life, not just getting by and surviving, but living and truly enjoying your life, at least on some level. I don't know how long this can last. What can you tell us from your perspective at sort of the intersection of those two backgrounds of yours?
Jimmy, it's the question, it's the existential question we face. We are, while we are using all our powers of prognostication, both, scientifically and economically, to try to determine our best course, the facts on the ground change day by day. So obviously, we have to keep our goal in mind. Our goal is to have everybody resume normal life. The faster that happens, the better. The faster we get to COVID-19 being something that we can tolerate in terms of a disease process the way we do influenza, for which we have interventions like Tamiflu and, of course, ultimately vaccines. So that's why it's so very, very important to have two things going on right now. One is, as I've already mentioned, the real life trial of the two-drug combo, and also ongoing accelerated, and credit the president and his team. They have removed regulatory barriers, and let's keep that in mind. Regulatory barriers, while they may definitely be protective of public health and safety, so we certainly, we don't want anarchy here, but regulatory barriers can get in the way of crucial progress. They have eliminated those barriers. They've accelerated. We take on a certain amount of risk with that, but the benefit right now, the magnitude of the benefit is that much larger because people are dying. So accelerated trials. The other thing is, yes, testing that is immediate testing, that is home-based, so and accurate. If these things in the wrong hands can or if incorrectly administered, can provide dangerously false information. But we do want to be able to document, who has the virus, who doesn't, and as we go through the next days and weeks, who's immune? There are tests so that we can prove somebody is serologically immune. Once we can do that, then we can put these people back out into the regular population. But to my mind, the absolute key is finding the medications that will convert COVID-19 from deadly on a mass scale relative to things like influenza. It seems to be about 10 times as deadly, so that we can eliminate the threat of the ICU crush, and then we can worry less about the economic damage that we are producing through flattening the curve.
Nan Hayworth, Dr. Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman and herself medical doctor. Always great to check in with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to help break this down. I mean, there's so much confusion, so much uncertainty going on from the medical side to the economic side, all around, and your insights are very much welcome, and we will have you back, I'm sure.
Thank you, Jimmy. And I'm doing a lot of battle on Twitter on @Nan Hayworth, so come join us. Thanks
Yes,
always
indeed.
for your thoughts and your voice, Jimmy. You are a force for good.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman and medical doctor herself, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We are going to take a break. When we come back, we'll introduce you to our producer extraordinaire, Nathan Matoush, the man behind the Matoush Magic. And then coming up a little later, we will be joined by Rick Newman, who is a Yahoo finance columnist. Keep it right here. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Don't go anywhere. Okay, welcome to the auditions for the official voice of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Name, please?
Kermit the Frog.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi-oh, Jimmy the show host here.
Next.
Next. I told you they wouldn't go for it, Froggy. Hiya!
And you are?
Stewie Griffin.
Can you sing a bumper song?
Oh, absolutely. La 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 la, la 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 la. This is so beneath me.
Thank you. Okay, next, previous experience in voice work.
I was a duck.
Next.
Affleck.
Okay, Dr. Evil, you're up.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to Jimmy at the frickin' Crossroads. We invite you to watch for $1 billion.
Mr. Simpson.
Wait.
Mr. Simpson.
Who's talking?
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Over here.
Oh, hey.
Let's hear the announcer voice.
I can't do an announcer voice. Oh, but I can do Mr. Burns. Announcer guy, eh? Excellent.
George W. Bush.
I'm here to auditionify for the announcerification process there for Jimmy Mushroomburger.
It's Sengenberger.
Jimmy In-N-Out Burger.
Next. And you are?
The name is Doc Brown.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Welcome back to the Crossroads.
I love your enthusiasm. When can you start?
Last year. I was trading derivatives when I got hit by an unexpected collapse of the market. My firm was in serious trouble until I found out we were too big to fail. When I called Dodd-Frank, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, they told me that because our financial company is so big, the government will never let us fail, no matter what harebrained investment strategy we employ. With their guarantee of protection, they made me whole. Now I don't have to worry about being too big to fail anymore. They gave me every reassurance I need, and they'll predict the future. And, sorry about the foreclosure on your house. It's just a little side effect. They're gonna make that right, too. 1.25 trillion, 1 trillion, 2.4 trillion. Not only do we get the big bailouts, but we get them fast. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau doesn't want you to know how much money we get for our clients. But don't worry about it. Call us. We're Dodd-Frank, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, the deep pockets.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back, Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Great to be with you today. Appreciate you taking the time. And I am so grateful as well to Dr. Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman for the 19th Congressional District in my original home state of New York. Of course, we're broadcasting from Denver, Colorado. And man, is there so much going on or what? It is hard to make heads or tails of what's happening, but we're trying to do it here on the show, making sense out of nonsense, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk-saying style. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, and we are doing this program in partnership with the Washington Examiner. You could see a little video there of our friends at the Examiner where, they're doing great reporting. Excellent work on the commentary side as well, and it's just such a pleasure and a privilege to be partnered up with them for Jimmy at the Crossroads, where politics and economics collide, and we will particularly get into some of the political stuff coming up on the show in the next segment the economic stuff with Rick Newman, Yahoo finance columnist. But today, what I want to do now is introduce you to our yeoman's producer extraordinaire, Nathan Matoush, or as we like to call him, Matoush Magic. Nathan, my friend, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Jimmy, how you doing today? I'm glad to be here.
Hey, I'm so pleased to have you. And we're going to try this where you are manning the screen there while also being on the program, like on camera there. And by the way, we've got Corby Wise. Corby, go ahead and wave hi.
There he is.
This is Corby Wise. He is our video guru joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Do you have some words to say, Corby?
And, I don't think we need Corby to...
Jimmy
Keep your distance, guys. Keep your distance.
Keep me off the mic, is all he says.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Keep them off the mic so we can keep that distance as much as we can here in this little studio. But Nathan, you're kind of new to politics. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on and sort of your thoughts here on the show. But when it comes to the sports world, I mean, your background more, you've done sports radio when it comes to Metro State here in Colorado and what have you. What are you noticing is going on in the sports world?
Well, I mean, it's obviously affected. Sports has been such a huge part of my life, and it's kind of like a routine in my life. To be honest, you go through the day, and what's on your mind is, what am I going to watch tonight?
Yeah.
What football game's going to be on tonight? And we kind of transfer through seasons. So, right now, we would be in the thick of the NCAA tournament right now. We'd be at the Sweet 16. The Sweet 16 would be coming up on Thursday, and also we'd be preparing for opening day, which would have been this coming Thursday. So it's just kind of, if you're a big sports nut like me, your life's just kind of on hold for a bit. But I'm thankful that I have this show to keep me going here, and I'm thankful to be on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Well, it's great to have you here doing the Matoush Magic, and this is a new program. It's new for all of us, but it's been fun so far, and we've got a lot of great content we'll be doing. So I'm just curious, from the sports standpoint, I mean, what you're saying echoes the sentiments of my dad, who's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my time if I can't watch the sports that I've always been enjoying. So thankfully, though, we have had some developments in the sports world. I mean, for example, Tom Brady's leaving the Patriots. I mean, what are some of the big highlights that actually give a little bit, at least a little bit, of something for sports talkers and sports TV hosts to be discussing?
Well, I think a big thing that's going on right now is the NFL free agency. That's such a key part of the NFL offseason. As you mentioned, Tom Brady packing his bags, going down south to Tampa Bay. I mean, this is huge news. If this coronavirus wasn't going on right now, this is what everyone would be talking about. But yeah, free agency going on. There's so many signings. Phillip Rivers, he signed with the Colts. That's a big name for you hometown Broncos fans around here. But he signs with the Colts. The Broncos signed Melvin Gordon. The Saints signed Brees to an extension. So much happening in the sports world from the NFL offseason perspective. But that's literally the only thing that's going on right now. That's pretty much all they're talking about.
And what did you make, Nathan Matoush, of the Tom Brady move away from the Patriots?
Well, I think it was time. You know, we see a lot of quarterbacks who exit, you know, their franchise at the end of their careers, and they go to a totally different team. In this case, you know, Tom Brady heading from the AFC East, where he was a New England Patriot, now down south to the NFC South, where he's a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. It's such a dramatic change, but we see it a lot. You know, we saw it. I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, and I was a huge Brett Favre fan back in the day, and I saw him put on Minnesota Vikings purple, and it was crazy. And even at one point, he put on New York Jets green. He was a New York Jet, so we see it a lot. I think it's good for the NFL. I think it's good for Tom Brady, and it'll be interesting. I think the Bucs are going to have a heck of a team.
It is going to be fascinating to see the season when it happens, because I'm optimistic that at least by the start of the football season, we should be good to go in watching those games. And I think we really should be, to be sure. All right, Nathan, I want to ask you to tell me a little bit about what you're thinking in regards to the dynamics that are at play in this country. So we've got an economic malaise going on. People are out of work. They're laid off or furloughed or what have you. The government's looking at big stimulus packages. We'll get to that more with Rick Newman of Yahoo Finance in the next segment. Meanwhile, you've got all of these different health concerns and the need to take precautions. You can't go to most places that you normally would, like a bar or restaurant. I can't go into Dunkin' Donuts and actually sit down and get work done while I'm there because you can only go in for takeout or go through the drive-through. Our lives are changing. What's going through your mind right now?
Well, I'll say this, Jimmy. That's pretty tragic that we can't go to Dunkin' Donuts. Your favorite location.
Gosh, I know.
To get that coffee, get the exactly how you want it to be. You know, they know you there. You know, you're an icon.
Actually,
it's
it is true. I know the staff by name. They know me by name at the particular Dunkin' Donuts that I go to. And I enjoy talking with people and having conversations, which is why they got to know me by name. I know them by name, and we have good rapport. And I care about those people who are working at Dunkin' Donuts and elsewhere because they're real people going through very difficult times and having to interact with customers as well. But please continue.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it just kind of throws off the normal routine. You know, us as Americans, here, we're always in that routine. You know, we're always just kind of dialed in. And when everything just kind of stops and is on pause for a bit, you know, in the midst of this epidemic, you know, it's quite crazy and quite different. I think it's more adjusting to not having normal life. And,
So-
you know.
Sure. Now, you're newer to politics, Nathan Matoush, and so I'm curious if you have questions that have been going through your mind in this environment, because we've got so much going on. The legislative process seems to be, in some respects, at a standstill. Yesterday, it seemed like this big $1 trillion+ stimulus package was going to be barnstorming its way right through Congress. Then Nancy Pelosi says, wait a second, and it fails in the United States Senate. Yeah, the Speaker of the House caused the failure of a bill in the United States Senate. And now we've got a situation on Monday where there's a debate, what's going to happen, how is this going to look, what's going to be the structure of whatever legislation they get through. Meanwhile, the American people are saying, okay, we need something to be done, some sort of relief, because so many people are out of work, they don't have any money coming through, and what have you. So you got the legislative process playing out with concern about congressmen, senators who are not able to go to the floor of their legislative body and to present their views as voting members of the House and Senate. And so a lot there. But what's kind of going through your mind as far as questions about the process and things that are taking place? What do you think people across the country are wondering, Nathan?
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, we look at what happened. You know, we were trying to get this big stimulus package to go through, and here we are thinking that it's going to go through, and then all of a sudden it doesn't go through, and it's just like, you know, what's going on here? How come, you know, political division is getting in the way of, you know, a crisis situation here? And I don't think it, because I know you were questioning a lot on the stimulus stuff, the stimulus package that was going to go on. But I think really the interesting part about it is it's not so much the package itself, but it doesn't look like the Democrats are on the same page as the Republicans here.
Well, no.
Yeah, obviously not.
Which, by the way,
it's just like, what's going on?
let me say that it is very fascinating to me as an observer of politics to see, in some respects, the Republicans are taking positions in some of these policy issues that some could say are even to the left of what the Democrats are doing right now in terms of their policy positions, what they're advocating for, and so forth. I like the idea of a more narrowly tailored proposal, that is to say, where they're focusing more, and we talked about this on Friday, they're focusing more on unemployment benefits to those who are temporarily out of work, expanding it to them, which this bill would do. But I'm not on board with the idea of let's just go ahead and give everybody a check, universal basic income, even temporarily, even if you means test that a little bit, because I think it sets a dangerous precedent for the long term. It also gets people to think, okay, in a crisis, the government could give us this money, but what about just every day when people are dealing with economic issues? Why not implement a UBI? And so I think that this provides an opportunity for some politicians to say, hey, let's take the advantage of this opportunity, see what happened before, and move forward with a new expansive program based on what was instituted under President Trump. So I have some concerns about that, to be sure, but there are some improvements in the bill that was passed yesterday. Just worried about where this will head and if it could even get worse. But in terms of the process, it seems to me like you're starting to learn a good bit about how all these things work, Matoush.
You know, I definitely have, and it definitely starts off with hanging around Mr. Sang Style himself, the political mind of Jimmy Sengenberger. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's super interesting. And you know, we were talking about this the other day. You were showing me some video, or not a video footage, audio clip of a leftist calling Trump more of a lefty than Barack Obama.
That was interesting.
And so
that was Jimmy Dore, a YouTuber, yeah.
I thought that was interesting. And although I mean, this does kind of look like socialism, you know, the stimulus package that they were introducing, I do think that we're in a time of crisis. So I think in times of crisis, I think we can have leeway on, you know, a stimulus package like this. But like you were saying, it's concerning to give, you know, I think it might be a little bit too far. Give everyone $1,000. Just kind of sounds like socialism to me. However, we're in times of crisis. You know,
that is the
different.
balancing act that our politicians should be undertaking, is how can we balance the need for relief versus the need for some sort of grandiose stimulus package, so-called. I mean, how can you stimulate an economy that you're not even allowing to function right now? You can't do that. So right now, to me, it's about providing relief to those most in need and doing what you can to flatten the curve in the short run, and then allow the people to get back to work and allow our country to start moving again. I know our politicians want to do that, but we can't go overboard with the policies here, and that's my particular concern. So, question to you as we wrap up this segment, Nathan Matoush, our yeoman's producer extraordinaire. What do you think is the biggest question on the minds of the average American right now?
Well, I think the biggest question is, how are we going to get something done in times of a crisis with a divided government? You know, Democrats versus Republicans. How are we going to get something done that's good for all in, you know, partisan agreement? I think that's really the main question, and I think it really puts our government to the test during times of a crisis like this. How are we going to come together? Not just the government, but how are the American people going to come together with being politically divided and in times of crisis? Quite frankly, I think we got to put our faith into God, like Donald Trump has said. You know, this country wants to put our faith into God, and I think it starts with that. I think in this crisis situation, we got to put more faith into God.
You know, I think that's so well put. And one thing that I noticed, Nathan, on Twitter was somebody sort of mocking the idea of faith. And I just responded. I retweeted it, and I put a comment that said, look, you can do both. She said we should rely on science here. And I said, look, you can rely on science to flatten the curve. In fact, we should rely on science to flatten the curve, but to have strength to get through this, relying on God, relying on faith, is not something that's mutually exclusive from science. You can't and should have both, because look, if you're wanting to flatten the curve, you got to listen to scientists, listen to what the doctors are trying to say. But at the same time, you want to get through this, leaning on God and prayer, in addition to family and friends to the greatest extent you can when you may be in isolation, that is critical. We definitely need both. But Nathan Matoush, Matoush Magic, good work so far. It's so great to work with you, and I'm looking forward to continuing here. Thanks for coming on today, too.
Oh, definitely. Hey, I'm looking forward to this. Let's do this more often, my friend.
Again, Nathan Matoush, at MatoushMagic_1 on Twitter, joining us live from the Jimmy at the Crossroads studio. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be joined by none other than Rick Newman, Yahoo Finance columnist, who I have to say he's always got interesting perspectives on this. We'll see where we agree, where we disagree, what's happening, what his thoughts are, how this all may go moving forward economically with the stimulus package. Markets in the red once again, so keep it right here. We've got a lot more coming up. Jimmy at the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Stay tuned.
Crikey, that was the biggest bloody mosquito I've ever seen. Wait, coming in. Oh, g'day, mate. You know, after a long day of kangarangling and croc roping, a man can really work up an appetite. Not to mention a whopper of a backache. I know a place, and that's why I like coming into the Back Out Steakhouse. The Back Out is the only place I know where you can sit down in a lumbar support Barca lounger and enjoy a big juicy bandicoot steak or a thick koala chop served by a licensed chiropractor. And as you partake of your meal, your server will provide you with a spinal manipulation, neck twist, the hip alignment, the full Matilda. One visit to the Back Out Steakhouse and your spirits will return like an Abbo's boomerang. So the next time your back goes on walkabout and you're coincidentally, simultaneously craving a slab of cooked meat, waltz on into the Back Out Steakhouse. You not only feel good down under, but all over. Back Out Steakhouse! Good stuff, eh, Skippy? Bloody boomerangs. Back Out Steakhouse!
Now, I want to introduce to you my phenomenal partner on this resolution, the great Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Oh, beautiful.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you to all of my colleagues here that have joined us today. This is so incredible. This is such a major watershed moment, and I am so incredibly excited that we are going to transition this country into the future, and we are not going to be dragged behind by our past.
I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and folks, we don't need some godforsaken, government-orchestrated Green New Deal to protect the environment and combat climate change. No, we need to unleash innovation through the free market. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey, the lead sponsors of the so-called Green New Deal in Congress, won't tell you this. The mainstream media won't tell you this. But the reality is that carbon dioxide emissions in the United States in recent years have been on a downward trend. Yes, a downward trend. For example, in 2017, the USA cut our carbon dioxide emissions by about the same amount as the entire European Union increased theirs. This is remarkable, especially since 2017 was the same year that President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. Not only that, but China and India are by far the biggest drivers in carbon dioxide output in the world. But what has led this revolution in the United States of reducing carbon dioxide emissions? Well, it has been the revolution in innovation. That is, the private sector has truly brought about some incredible gains in technological improvements that have resulted in this dramatic decline in carbon dioxide emissions. That's particularly, for example, with the production of oil and natural gas through increases in the technological innovations of fracking or hydraulic fracturing.
So for me, this is kind of like Groundhog Day. I'm experiencing all the same outrage and all the same predictions of apocalypse and the world is coming to an end and all the rest of it. And you know what happened when George Bush pulled out of the Kyoto Treaty? In the next 14 years, we reduced our emissions by 18%. We reduced our emissions faster than the European countries that are now criticizing Donald Trump. Our emissions right now are at 1992 levels. And it's not because of a treaty. It's not because of some piece of parchment signed in Paris or Kyoto. It's because of the free market economy, innovation, and technology. It's hydraulic fracking. It's all of these clean coal technologies that are reducing our emissions.
The reality is that the private sector has been driving these dramatic improvements in technology that has reduced carbon dioxide emissions. In other words, it is the free market that has been driving forward with combating climate change. If this is happening, and it has been happening, what we really need is to unleash more of the unlimited potential of the private sector, of the free market, of each and every individual, because that is the pathway to defeating climate change and really saving the planet, not through some government scheme. The Millennial Policy Center just came out with some great research on how we can fix environmental problems and combat climate change through the free market. To learn more, log on to millennialpolicycenter.org. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Always great to be with you, making sense out of nonsense and bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. By the way, if you want to learn more about yours truly, you can log on to my website, jimmysengenberger.com. And just keep in mind that there's no A, there's no I, there's no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. Also, be sure to check out our friends at the Washington Examiner on the web at washingtonexaminer.com, our wonderful media partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks again to U.S. Senator Cory Gardner, former Congresswoman Nan Hayworth, and also to Nathan Matoush for joining us. In just a few moments, we will bring on to the show Mr. Rick Newman, who is a columnist at Yahoo Finance, and get his thoughts on what's going on at this point in time. But to set the stage, I want to play a clip here of Steve Mnuchin. Now, this is cut 3. Steve Mnuchin, of course, is the Treasury Secretary, and yesterday he was describing the original plan that failed the United States Senate 47-47. He was describing a plan that had been put forward by the administration, 4 key parts to it, so we can hear a little bit of what he had in mind and what Congress was looking at, what the Senate was looking at passing and decided not to approve. Again, 47-47. Let's take a listen to Steve Mnuchin.
The first part are what I call small business retention loans. If you're a small business, you'll get 2 weeks of cash flow to pay your workers. You need to retain them. You'll also get some overhead. And if you do that, those loans will be forgiven. That's about half of our workforce. That will allow small businesses to keep people and make sure when we open the economy, they're up and running. The second part is direct deposits. The average direct deposit or check for a family of 4 will be approximately $3,000. This you can think of as a bridge for them to get through this quickly. The third component is enhanced unemployment insurance for people that are laid off due to the coronavirus. And the fourth component is a significant package working with the Federal Reserve, we'll have up to $4 trillion of liquidity that we can use to support the economy. And those are broad-based lending programs under Section 13.3. We can leverage our equity working with the Federal Reserve. And then on top of it, the president is determined. Hospitals need money. There's a very significant amount of money for hospitals and medical professionals.
Last I heard that for the hospitals, it was $110 billion. Is that what you're looking at still?
That's approximately, we're negotiating the final numbers, but we want to make sure the hospitals have money. The best way to get through this is for us to win this war with this virus.
All right, so that is Steve Mnuchin, of course, Treasury Secretary. Yesterday on Fox News Sunday, he was listing out what was proposed, what was before the United States Senate. He was optimistic. He thought that it would be passed by today. Well, Congress sort of went back to the drawing board in some respects because the Senate did not succeed in passing yesterday's legislation. So we'll see where things go. But as I have said, I've been concerned about the approach that the Trump administration and members of Congress have been taking as far as the really expansive nature of this. I don't think that we should have a massive stimulus package a la 2009, especially because the economy is not allowed to work in full. The government is necessitating in many, many states across the country growing numbers that businesses are either scaled back or they are unable to work altogether, at least on location. They have to telecommute or not go into work. So it's hard to stimulate an economy that you're not allowing to even happen at this point in time. Let's keep that in mind. But also, I think we should be focused on targeted relief, for example, expanding the unemployment insurance system so that we can include people who are furloughed. Now, that's included in this legislation, specifically relative to coronavirus. But they also have the UBI sort of program where most Americans will receive direct checks from the federal government, which is not the kind of program I'm in favor of, and I think that sets a dangerous precedent. And as we move forward, it could be something that members of Congress may look at and say, hey, we should just make this permanent and not have it just during a crisis. I think there were some improvements in yesterday's bill vis-a-vis what to do about businesses so that they're doing okay, so that they can get some support and have some liquidity in the system. But at the same time, we need to be smart. The corporate bailouts, I'm concerned about that, especially the way in which they are doled out. If they go to everybody, if they go to large numbers of companies, including companies who we're already going to be struggling even without the coronavirus crisis, and then you have the government basically keeping them afloat. We need to be a little more strategic in what companies are getting support from the government. All right, are we ready for our guest, Rick Newman? Rick Newman is a Yahoo Finance columnist and host, and I always enjoy getting his perspective on the economy, and he joins us now. Rick, hello, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Great to have you here. So, first of all, how are you weathering this coronavirus storm, so to speak, that we've got? I mean, you're doing your shows from home for Yahoo Finance. What's shaking in your world?
I'm very lucky because I have no young kids at home with me. My kids are 21 and 23, and they're basically off on their own. So I'm in my home by myself. My ex-wife left a long time ago, so I'm enjoying it. We are doing something really interesting at Yahoo Finance. We are broadcasting live 8 hours a day, all market hours as we normally do. And we're doing it completely remotely using webcams like the one I'm talking into right now and other things like that. We have technicians who are making this all work, and we're somehow pulling it off. So I'm fine. I am here in New York, right outside of New York City, which apparently has now become one of the global epicenters of this pandemic. The community, there definitely are people around here who have it. We're hearing a lot of reports about hospitals that are getting close to the breaking point. So we're taking it very seriously where I am.
So let's talk a little bit about where you view the economy as being at right now. I mean, obviously, there are a heck of a lot of workers across the country who are being told you cannot go into work, or in a state like Colorado, workforces for what's called non-essential workers or companies are being cut in half for those who are able to go into work. The governor yesterday, Governor Jared Polis of Colorado, said, hey, we want to reduce the number of people in your workforce actually showing up at your offices by mandate, but he's not shutting things down like your state of New York is, like California is, now Michigan. But at the same time, as a result of this, we have lost incomes. We have people who aren't able to move about their daily lives, to enjoy life, let alone maybe even get by. What do you make of where things are at economically overall right now? And do you think that the word recession is appropriate to use at this point, Rick Newman?
Absolutely. Based on all the Wall Street analysts and economists we're talking to, I mean, I would say there's almost unanimous agreement that the United States is in a recession and probably the whole world is close to a recession. So this is a different recession, though. This is not like essentially all other recessions, which basically build up over time, and there become imbalances in the economy, or there could be asset bubbles, which is what happened in 2008 and 2009. I mean, this is a single point of failure recession triggered by a virus. So the economists who are doing, the best with the limited information we all have think if all of these protectionist measures that are going into place and the social distancing, if these can actually do a decent job of restraining the spread of the virus, and this is super important, and we get basically universal testing. We need to have testing everywhere for anybody who wants it fast. Then there's a chance we could get back to something that looks like normal economic activity by, let's say, the second half of 2020. But it's not going to be back to normal until we get a vaccine, because there's just no other way to combat this thing. Now, we're getting new information all the time. Some economists aren't even making forecasts anymore. There are a lot of companies that are saying we're just suspending our guidance on our financial outlook because we just don't have anything to go on at this point. Sure. Uncertainty, of course, is a problem in itself. We've got massive amounts of uncertainty. So you've got kind of a bifurcated outlook here. The situation, without knowing anything about where we're going with this virus, it's somewhat terrifying. Yeah. And you're seeing really horrifying numbers for things like what GDP growth in the second quarter might look like. But if we can get a handle on it and start to contain the spread of this virus, then we could get back to something close to normal by later this year.
Just a couple of quick points that this brings to mind. One thing for me, Rick Newman, is I think that the word recession doesn't particularly apply here, certainly in the traditional notion, which is the idea that we have 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth or an economic contraction. Instead, what this is an economic shock that is, I would think, depending on how long this lasts, may not be a very sustained one. Sustained economic slowdown, which I think is at the core of what a recession is, a sustained contraction of the economy, not just something that may be shorter term, but also the other question that comes to my mind is how long we can really withstand this. I mean, the American people are people who value their liberty, value their ability to live their lives in accordance with what they want to do. And I don't know how many weeks we can actually sustain as a people this kind of shutdown where you are quarantined in your homes with limited ability to get around, maybe not even going to work, maybe finding yourself relying upon a government that you never in your life wanted to rely upon because of what the government's doing in shutting down these businesses, rightly or wrongly, necessary or not, in order to flatten the curve. What are your thoughts on the question of a recession versus like economic shock and the terminology, but also how long we can really withstand this as a people?
Well, on the question of whether this is a recession, I think there's a very good chance that this will meet what you might call the official definition of a recession, which you pointed out is 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP growth. We could end up with 3 consecutive quarters of declining GDP growth, and that's assuming we do get out of this at some point. The question of how far should you go? To some extent, it's unanswerable, but you're basically weighing individual liberty against public health, and public health is an abstraction when it's somebody else's grandmother in someplace else that's 4 states away who's who might die by coming into contact with this virus. But the closer it gets to home, the less it becomes a matter of public health, for the country, and something that you need to do to safeguard your own family. So I will tell you, in my coverage of this over, let's say, the last 3 weeks, I've definitely heard from a lot of people who do not live in one of the coastal states that has gotten hit with this first. And they are, some of them have said, wow, you East Coast media really are making a big deal out of nothing. And I think, but look, now it's in Louisiana. Now it's in Indiana. I mean, and I don't just mean there are a couple of cases there. It's clearly a giant problem in Illinois, not just a couple of cases, but, flyover country, the part of the country that people who live there think people like me are always looking down on and dismissing. This is going to hit flyover country as well. So if we get to a point where there's some sort of basic rebellion and, significant numbers of people are saying, I don't give a damn who dies, I'm going to the movies. I think we're going to have a big problem. But I also think it's probably not going to get to that point because most businesses just will not open if opening means that they're endangering their workers or they're endangering their customers or something like that. I mean, in one sense, that's a legal liability. If there's government guidance that says don't open and you do open and then something happens to somebody, you've got a problem. So these are somewhat imponderables, Jimmy. And, I hope we don't get to, I hope we can somehow do better than that, that we end up at war with ourselves. But I recognize the tension.
Sure. No, here's the thing that kind of comes to my mind in regards to, and it is a very tough thing to grapple with because, as you said, we're balancing individual liberty with public health. But economic livelihoods and the ability to get out and about and see other people and not just be in isolation. I mean, there's only so long I think that people can go on Skype or Zoom without feeling isolated or feeling trapped. And I think that we could see an increase in loss of life from people taking their own lives as a result of this kind of stress if it continues to go on. There's a lot of anxiety that's happening, especially people with depression who, it becomes very concerning for many who are depressed, who are solitary and so forth at this point in time, aren't used to that, don't have interactions with other people as much and what have you. I hate to say that because it is a very difficult topic to grapple with is the mental health, but we know how big of an issue mental health is in our society today. I would think you and I would both agree that our society hasn't handled this well enough as far as the broader mental health issues. And so I think the quality of life is also important to saving lives and making sure that you're making something out of your life instead of just being trapped for weeks on end. And that, I think, goes to the cornerstone of the question that I'm asking you about how long this can really last. I mean, obviously, we have to be looking at the science and working hard to flatten the curve through the policies that are necessary. But I think we have to concern ourselves with more than just by keeping people distance, you're going to save their lives. Because there's more to life and to living than just being quarantined in order to keep your heart beating.
Well, I mean, you're putting a bunch of things into a big basket, and it's not as if these things are all mutually exclusive. I mean, if you ignore social distancing guidelines and you, let's say you just go out and do whatever you want,
I agree.
And you get the disease, well, guess what? Your mental health is going to be a lot worse if you get COVID-19 than if you don't get COVID-19. And if you end up hooked up to a ventilator or trying to get care at an ICU when there are no beds, I mean, obviously you're much worse off. I mean, I think about this, more from the economic perspective. That's what I do at Yahoo Finance. And it's not really, I mean, here, if New York is a preview for what's coming to a town near you, people can go out and there's nowhere to go. I mean, you want to go, I mean, you can, I mean, let me tell you what we can do here, for example. People are going to parks, and I'm a runner, so I've been going running, and there are a lot of people out, but, people are staying away from each other, and you have to find a place where you can actually do that. In New York City, they're trying to tell people don't go to central parks because that's a dense urban environment, and it's harder to stay, 6 feet away from people or whatever the guidance is. In terms of economic activity, I mean, if I wanted to go out and spend some money in my neighborhood, I could spend money at a deli. I couldn't get a haircut if I wanted because that place is closed. I can go to CVS, but there's no toilet paper, of course, so I have to buy something else. So you can go to stores and get basic things. You cannot go to the movie theater. And I agree with you. Once we get to a point where we're talking about shutting these things down on a prolonged basis with no end in sight, then absolutely, we do have to start figuring out at what point does the economic cost outweigh the social benefit or the health benefit? And there is a point where that is. Now, there's no we're not going to do this in the optimal way. There's no way we're going to do this with optimal gains to public health and the least possible economic damage. And we're all muddling through, and that's how this is going to go. I mean, we are going to muddle through. More people are going to get sick than if we had done it perfectly. More people are going to die than if we had done it perfectly. We're going to have more economic damage than if we had done it perfectly. But do you or I want to be the one who outlines the plan here? I mean, these are tough choices.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Again, we're talking with Rick Newman, Yahoo finance columnist, and I do think that right now governments are taking these steps to try to flatten the curve, right, to buy some time, especially to develop a cure, to develop a vaccine, and scientists are, of course, working at it at a fever pitch.
Jimmy, if I could just interrupt, make one point. I mean, the most important thing that we can do is get tests everywhere. Yes. I mean, that is the best economic stimulus, and that's also the best approach to the healthcare problem. I mean, the number 1 through 5 biggest problems we have right now is not enough tests. If you have enough tests, if everybody can get tested on very short notice, then you can figure out who has it, who doesn't. And then if you have it, you go over here, and if you don't have it, you go over here. So if you can do that, I mean, again, this would not be perfect, but that is the way to get back to some kind of economic activity, because of all the people who are carrying the virus and are infectious but don't have symptoms. We have no way of knowing right now who the people are who are carrying the virus but don't have symptoms. If we could test everybody in the country, everybody would know. And then you do it again 5 days later and 5 days after that. And that's how you get to the point of really segregating out the people and taking care of the people who need that and letting everybody else carry forward with the economy.
How do we accomplish that objective? 329 or so million people in this country. How do we accomplish the objective of getting enough tests created? Because, and especially if you want every 5 years or 5 days to test everybody, what's necessary in order to accomplish that, Rick Newman?
To my mind, I mean, I'm not an expert on the healthcare supply chain, but there are many companies that produce these tests. And I mean, we are clearly getting to the point where we're going to have more tests available. To my mind, that should be a top priority of the federal government in coordination with state governments. And there should be, the task force that is working this I'm sure they are to some extent, but we're hearing them talk about all kinds of different things. To my mind, number 1, how do we just dramatically ramp up the capacity for testing? I mean, I don't believe it can be done overnight, but do it as fast as possible and just make everybody understand that's the priority.
Rick Newman from Yahoo Finance, once again, our guest. Just a few minutes left. I want to go to cut 2 here. This is Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, yesterday evening on the floor of the Senate after the 47-47 vote, in essence, the failure of this procedural measure to move forward with the big stimulus package, $1 trillion-plus package that Republicans in particular were really working towards after Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives, raised particular objections, and bada boom, bada bing, that bill fails yesterday, and now we're still wondering what's going to happen, where are things going. But here's Mitch McConnell excoriating Democrats for this against Senate Majority Leader.
So at a time when the country is crying out for bipartisanship and cooperation, and we saw that over the last 48 hours when regular members of the Senate, not in the leadership office, not in the Speaker's office, for goodness sake, she's the Speaker of the House, not the Speaker of the Senate. We don't have one. We were doing just fine until that intervention. So I want the American people to fully understand what.
So that's just a snippet, Rick Newman, of what Mitch McConnell had to say last night. As far as the politics of this, trying to reach some kind of agreement, I mean, I'm not on board with this expansive effort that we're seeing from many of the politicians to go, for example, in the direction more of a UBI. I am on board with the expansion of the pre-existing unemployment insurance system to furloughed workers. Streamline that process, by the way, so that you can get people into the system more quickly who need it, because right now across the country you have shutdowns on these websites where they're not working well. People are overloading the system, and that's a problem. But I'm in favor of that. I think that providing some liquidity to businesses makes sense. I don't think that you should necessarily give liquidity to companies that are not shut down just because of this, that are not struggling just because of this coronavirus crisis, because there are companies who may have been just struggling beforehand because their business models weren't working, and then to suddenly say we're going to bail out your company now, not just because of coronavirus, but in general and providing this opportunity. I think you need to be a little more constrictive there. But overall, I'm looking at it from the perspective of narrowly tailored, temporary, targeted for those who need relief the most, not for people who are still able to go about somewhat business as usual to conduct their lives, to continue doing their business and so forth, hence my opposition to sort of the UBI approach. But I'm curious what you think, first of all, of the politics of this and what should or shouldn't be done at this point.
I hate politicians as much as anybody, but what you just saw with Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, will have her says, well, this is just theater. Congress is going to pass a bill. It's probably going to be very large. So what usually happens when you've got split Congress, where Democrats have leverage and Republicans have leverage, you get a giant, disgusting pile of giveaways that has something for both sides, and that is, I'm very sure that's what we're about to get. So, you're talking what you favor, Jimmy, is a kind of surgical approach, and I just don't think Congress can do that. It's just not something you can do very well through legislation. And one of the things the Democrats object to is this sort of $500 billion blank check that the Treasury Secretary, it would be up to his discretion, that Steven Mnuchin, a Trump crony, it would be up to him to some extent to decide which companies get money and which don't. I mean, who likes that idea? That one person or one group of elite individuals in Washington get to decide which companies get money. I mean, that just sounds like that sounds almost borderline corrupt, frankly. So we're going to get a big stimulus bill. It's going to include the checks to individuals that you don't like. I'm sorry about that, but the reason I know that's going to happen is we've done that before. And no stimulus program does everything you want it to do the way you want it to do. But giving people money, I don't like it either. I mean, I've written everything that's wrong with universal basic income. But, economists have studied this in great detail, and it's actually a pretty good way to get money into the economy and stimulate spending the way you want it to do. And there are liberal economists who think that and conservative economists who think that. So that's going to happen. There are going to be bailouts for companies, but the Democrats are going to succeed in putting pretty strict limits on what those companies can do once they get the money. So I think there will be limits on stock buybacks, raises and bonuses for executives. And I actually do hope that there are some requirements that force those companies to put some of that money toward protecting their payrolls, keeping people employed. That would be, to my mind, a reasonable reaction to the 2008 and 2009 bailouts, which were necessary but did not have protections like that. And it really looked like it was a Wall Street bailout and not a Main Street bailout. I would like to think we'll do a little bit better this time around.
Wrapping up with our guest, Rick Newman, Yahoo Finance columnist. Research I have seen suggests that the tax rebates that President Bush did in the early 2000s, and then also that President Obama did 2009, 2010, that most of that went towards paying off debts, which I don't think would be the case now, because people right now are trying to put their money towards day-to-day expenses and what have you. But I don't think as well that you have a stimulative effect when you're already putting economies on largely a shutdown. Instead of being stimulative, what you're doing is keeping people afloat more, which is providing relief, hence why I'm in favor of the unemployment insurance expansion, which I don't think is surgical. I think that it is a little more targeted than just saying, let's do a blanket program. And I think this is structured a little differently from the tax rebates that Bush and Obama did. It seems much more like a universal basic income and a system that now, especially when you've got more and more people talking about UBI as a way to go as a general policy measure, you set a precedent for a crisis in the future, but you also set a base point where a politician can say, well, look, we did this now or during the crisis. Why don't we just make this a regular way to go for reasons, say, that Andrew Yang has brought up, Bernie Sanders, what have you. And so I'm concerned about some of the long-term implications of this as well. It's important to get something done, and we need to do that and provide relief. But how you go about it, I really think is also important, Rick.
Well, you talked about the stimulus checks, the cash, the helicopter money, and then expanded unemployment insurance as if they are mutually exclusive. They're not. We're going to get both of them. So there will be.
Right. Well, true.
And what
I think
usually
the one
happens
without
is-
the other, but go ahead.
Yeah, unemployment insurance is administered at the state level. But what Congress does do typically is they can expand it. So instead of, if it's 26 weeks, they can expand it to 52 weeks or whatever. And they can also do that on a rolling basis. They're going to do that, and they are going to send out these checks. And again, not too many people like any of this, but I'm actually not worried that these stimulus checks are going to become Andrew Yang's freedom dividend or a $1,200 a month check that goes out to every American in perpetuity. I think that's impossible. And I think there's a giant gulf between one check or two checks going out in the middle of a shock recession like we have right now, and doing this as a matter of policy on an ongoing basis. For, just one thing, I mean, Andrew Yang's UBI would be financed by a 10% value added tax. And there is no chance Congress is going to pass a 10% value added tax now, not next year, not the year after that, and possibly never. So there's the financing mechanism for prolonged UBI is simply not there. And it's going to be enough of a pill to swallow just to add, what we're going to add to the deficit, just to do the stimulus checks this time around. It's not going to go much further than that.
I'll just say that I'm talking about it being mutually exclusive, not because it will be, but because I think it should be. But Rick Newman, Yahoo finance columnist, always appreciate you having a conversation on these important issues. You give great insights, and I look forward to many more conversations ahead on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Sounds good, except maybe let's get over this crisis.
Yes, absolutely. That's for darn sure, and I hope and pray that we do. Again, Rick Newman, check him out, Yahoo finance columnist and also host on their programming. Just a couple final words as we wrap up and wind down this edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, and I do appreciate you joining us today. We will be watching the crisis as it unfolds, the policy responses from politicians, as well as the market impact. As of this broadcast, we are seeing stock market once again underwater, going downward today by several hundred points. We'll see what the trajectory is moving forward. Tomorrow, we're hoping to have Mark D. Cook, author of the book Prepare Now and Survive the Coming Bear Market. And folks, the bear market is here. We're in the midst of it. On Wednesday, we'll have Chris Burns from Dynamic Money, who is CEO of that company and financial advisor. We'll get his thoughts on what's happening in the markets. We'll have more engaging, intelligent talk, saying style on the economic issues, on the politics, and more here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, with the kind of analysis that we know our partners at the Washington Examiner bring day in and day out. So that is it for us today. We will be back tomorrow on Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Keep it going. Keep working hard to get through this time period. It's a challenge, but we can all do it with prayer and coming together. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Have a great day, and God bless America.